Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, and I hope my voice is sound and clear. People are still telling me that sometimes my volume is too high, sometimes it's too low. I truly don't know. It depends on the machines that they are using, apparently. So, guys, Victoria Nuland, he has retired from her position, and she has been serving many American administrations and many American presidents. And this is one of the, in my opinion, problems in the United States, that there are certain bureaucrats who serve in administrations after administrations without being elected. They are bureaucrats, and they keep the major headlines of the US foreign policy intact. And mostly these people are the neocons, unfortunately, and the warmongers. I can read your comments. I wanna little bit go through your comments about the resignation or the retirement of Victoria Nuland. Ali says, "Everybody, please sing Oh Happy Day." Rahul says, "A white woman and its consequences have been a disaster to human society." Alvaro says, "Great news." Shroom says, "How did that evil sow even get this far?" Rupert says, "The cookie monster is gone. That's how the cookie crumbles." Sausan says, "We support you, Kevork." Thank you, Sausan. And Grassy says, "I hope this means that it's the beginning of the end of this unnecessary war." I truly hope so, and I'm coming to that later in this live streaming. Damas says, "Nuland made billions of dollars from the war in Ukraine. Now the well is satisfied." Yes, she made lots of money, but these billions of money came to the military-industrial complex in her own confessions, that I will address it also later in this live streaming. So the news, guys, if we want to see first what the mainstream media says about this news, and we are talking about here the Association Press. The Association Press says Victoria Nuland, the third highest ranking US diplomat and critic of Russia's war in Ukraine, retiring. Victoria Nuland, the third highest ranking US diplomat and frequent target of criticism for her hawkish views on Russia and its actions in Ukraine, will retire and leave her post this month, the State Department said Tuesday. Even the mainstream media couldn't but say that she has hawkish views on Russia, and her actions in Ukraine exacerbated the situation there. Nuland, a career Foreign Service officer who served as Assistant Secretary of State for Europe during the Obama administration, but retired after Donald Trump was elected president, returned to government as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in the Biden administration. And funny enough, she served under the Obama administration when they cooked the coup in Kiev in 2014. And when Trump came, she left the scene. And when Biden came back to presidency, she came back this time to serve as, again, Undersecretary for Political Affairs. And she, during her tenure, the hot war erupted in Ukraine. So when she was working in the Obama administration, there was a coup in Ukraine. And when she came back to the administration of Biden, again, there was a hot war between Ukraine and Russia. She had been a candidate to succeed Wendy Sherman as Deputy Secretary of State and had served as acting deputy since Sherman's retirement 7 months ago, but lost an internal administration personnel battle when President Joe Biden nominated Kurt Campbell to the number 2 spot. Campbell took office last month. Nuland had served at the US Embassy in Moscow in the tumultuous 1990s and was in the city during the attempted coup against former Russian President Boris Yeltsin. Again, another coincidence, when she was serving in the US Embassy there. And I truly sometimes ask myself this question, especially the former diplomats, American diplomats or British diplomats and ambassadors, when they serve in Moscow, and then they retire or they come back to their own countries and they become really, really radicalized against Russia. Like, as if there are two options here, right? Either the Russians mistreated them badly in Russia, which is something that I rule out because they didn't say anything when they were in their positions. But when they come back to their own countries, they become so hawkish against Russia. And I think the explanation for it is that in the 90s and after the fall of the Soviet Union and with the celebration of the neocons for the fall of the Soviet Union, and what was the situation in Moscow in the aftermath, right? It was poverty, starvation, and the economic situation was a misery, and the Americans were they were trying to privatize the Russian economy through their investments and through their so-called reforms. And Russia was in a very, very bad shape, right, until Putin came to power. And Putin revived the Russian, let's say, federation and its might and its position on the international scene. I think that's the point when they started to hate Russia, because they didn't want to see Russia prosperous again. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the reason why there was a NATO in the first place, because they wanted to counter the Soviet Union and communism. And when communism was defeated in Russia, and the Russian Federation now is not a communist country, I mean, it's more capitalist than than communist, right? The thing for them was that they didn't want to include Russia into the so-called international community, to the so-called rules-based order. And the Russians tried to become part of it. And they even said, like, what if we join NATO? Would you accept us in NATO? And they said, no, we don't accept you in NATO. And they continued expanding every year to the east till the borders with Russia. And then when the turn came to Ukraine, Russia sees Ukraine as its strategic debt and its social debt, its civilizational debt. And there is so much history and civilizational interaction between Ukraine, the current Ukraine, and Russia. And they wouldn't tolerate Ukraine becoming a NATO member or becoming a pawn for NATO. So they went to war against Ukraine, right? And the result is now hundreds of thousands of casualties among the Ukrainians and among the Russians. So I truly believe that the reason why this hatred and Russophobia against the current Russian Federation by these diplomats and by these former ambassadors, etc., is because Russia revived itself from the ashes, and they are competing now on the international scene. So she then became the US ambassador to NATO before being tapped to serve as the State Department spokeswoman under former Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton during President Obama's first term. So we know now all this information about Nuland, and then she was sacked when she was working with John Kerry, and Sergei Lavrov told John Kerry that it's good, that congratulated him that he got rid of that woman, but Kerry told to Lavrov that he didn't get rid of her, he promoted her. So current Secretary of State Antony Blinken praised Nuland for her 3.5 decades of public service and thanked her for her role in shaping US policy around the world under 6 presidents and 10 secretaries of state. This is what I want to reiterate. Like, the problem with the United States is not the presidents that you can probably elect, right? But these bureaucrats who serve under different administrations and under different presidents, and they make sure to keep the United States foreign policy intact. And in the past 3 decades, the neocons have taken over the foreign policy of the United States. Regardless of who is the president, the foreign policy is either hawkish against Russia or hawkish against China or hawkish against both. And if not, then it's a hawkish against Iran, Syria, North Korea. And like, there was no time in the past 30 years where the United States tried to pursue peaceful relationship with all these countries. There was none. At least since the 9/11 and the so-called war against terror, right? As far as I remember, I mean, I opened my eyes to politics during that time. Every year I see that the United States is going either to hot war against some country, or a hybrid war, or a covert operations, or regime change wars, or coup d'etats, etc., etc. And this is why I want to make this live streaming, because we have to speak about this, the legacy of Victoria Nuland, right? And I couldn't leave this space, the online space, for the pro-neocon people just to post their stuff online. And yesterday, when I posted something about Victoria Nuland on my X account, and there were tens of thousands of people interacting with it. It went viral. So at the first few hours, it was fine. Everybody was criticizing her. And then it seems that this post has become so viral that the federal agents in the United States and all these pro-neocon people, it caught their attention. So they started, oh no, we have to thank her for her services. She was a national hero, etc., etc. National hero for who? National hero for you as a federal agent, or national hero probably for you as a neocon. But for the rest of the world, she was a warmonger, and her role in Ukraine was so destructive that I truly believe that if the Ukrainians really are told the truth of the issue and the truth of the conflict in Ukraine, they would spit on her face, right? And they would not continue in this soulless and helpless war, and this war that is harvesting the lives of tens of thousands of Ukrainians. They're using the Ukrainians as pawns, right? So, in any ways, the Russian Foreign Ministry immediately seized on the announcement, calling it an admission of failed U.S. policy toward Russia. And now Nuland will be replaced temporarily as undersecretary by another career diplomat, John Bass, a former ambassador to Afghanistan who oversaw the U.S. withdrawal from the country. So this is an important point here that probably, I'm saying, like also we'll address this at the end of this live streaming, that this could be good news that she's leaving this position to John Bass, who oversaw the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. So can it be that the United States will back off from this conflict in Ukraine? Can it be that the Americans finally came to the conclusion that the alternative for this conflict, the alternative for Ukraine winning this war is, or Russia being defeated, is a nuclear exchange, or they don't want World War III? I truly hope that that is the case. I truly hope that they took out this character from the US administration and replaced her with another person who will oversee the withdrawal of the US presence in Ukraine in terms of the military personnel, the tacit covert operations that they are doing there, the biolabs that they created there. And I'm going to that also in this live streaming. Now, two comments that I found really interesting on X about Victoria Nuland. One came from Alfred Desayas, who is a former senior UN official, and he said Victoria Nuland is finally leaving the State Department. She leaves toxic legacy of imperial arrogance, endless provocations, endangering the safety of the United States and ultimately the world, a legacy of failure. And the second one is from David Sachs. David Sachs says, Nuland is to Ukraine as Fauci is to COVID. What was Nuland's job at the State Department supposed to be? Diplomacy. What did she actually do? Foment conflict with Russia. What was Fauci's job at the NIH? Public health. What did he actually do? Fund dangerous gain of function research. These powerful unelected bureaucrats who run the government across administrations are literally doing the opposite of what they are supposed to. They're not making us safe. They're causing crisis after crisis. Nothing will change until we get rid of them. Do you guys realize that really influential people in the United States, like David Sachs, for example, increasing number of journalists, public figures, are really speaking against these warmongering and hawkish policies of the United States? I haven't seen these, for example, phenomenon in the past 5 years. It started to happen more after COVID, and now there is more suspicions among the Americans and especially among the intellectuals in the United States, those who are not embedded with the US establishment and do not have invested interest with the military-industrial complex. They are speaking against the wars, right? And this is good phenomenon, in my opinion, because the change must come from the United States. And the change should not be with a nuclear exchange or a battle or a war between these superpowers, between these nuclear powers. The change must come from a society level, in the United States, and the pressure from the grassroots must come to the top of the hierarchy, and the change must come from inside the United States. This is in my opinion. Now, usually, guys, you know that I make short videos on X, on Twitter, and I publish it at 8 p.m. Central European time, 2 p.m. Eastern American time on my personal account. But I usually do short videos, like 2-3 minutes, and I write the script and I read the script and I do it fast. But today I wanted to improvise, or let's say to do it more spontaneous, without a script, without a teleprompter, right? So let me know, what do you think about this? This is around 8 minutes or 7 minutes. It's about, again, the Nuland's case. And let me know in the comments, which one do you prefer? Do you prefer me reading in the teleprompter when I'm doing these short videos? Or shall I do it without a teleprompter and it will be a little bit longer, but more elaborated? Let me know. So we're going to play the video now. Observers of American politics know Victoria Nuland very well since the invasion of Iraq up until the Ukraine war. So she resigned. She submitted her resignation as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. And in my opinion, there is nothing to celebrate about this, because yesterday I wrote this on X. I said, it seems that the Washington, D.C. regime continues to breed demons, and the swamp of demons will never dry out. And allow me to explain my opinion in this regard. There are certain personalities and individuals in politics who have committed heinous crimes and unspeakable crimes that we call them demons or evil. For example, Hitler, what he did before World War II and during World War II. So there is a consensus of calling him, for example, in the 21st century as an evil person, right? But there are other type of politicians who do not personally or directly commit such heinous crimes, but they co-wage similar crimes against their opponents, and they orchestrate decisive political and security events which lead to the killing of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people, right? Big bloodshed. One of these examples is what happened in Ukraine. The American-led covert operations in the era before the 2014 and in 2014, which led to the removal of the democratically elected president back then. The process of removing Viktor Yanukovych from power was unconstitutional, and in political terms, it was called a coup. And it was facilitated by the neocons in Washington, D.C., headed by then Vice President Joe Biden, and then Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland. Coincidentally, the hot war between Russia and Ukraine erupted in February 2022 when President Biden came to power as a president, and Victoria Nuland came back to the administration, this time serving as the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. The gravity of the Ukraine war, which was provoked by the neocons like Nuland, like Joe Biden, like other personalities like McCain, for example, the late McCain, cannot be underestimated. The world nowadays is faced with hundreds of thousands of deaths among the Ukrainians and the Russians. Ukraine has permanently lost its sovereignty, it has lost the Crimean Peninsula permanently, and also lost the main industrial regions in the country. The European economies are suffering immensely, and some even go further and say these economies are deindustrializing. And this was probably the plan of NATO since its creation. So there are documents that speak about this case, right? Now, opposite to the wishes of the neocons, Russia's military capabilities significantly increased. Also, the economy of Russia is not suffering as they wanted, unlike the European economies in this regard, right? I live in Germany and I see the spike in the prices every day in our basic necessities, our bills. So the middle class and the below middle class are also suffering in this country. Russia, China, and Tehran, the three pillars of the Eurasia region, pursued closer ties, and this was the nightmare of the United States, according to Brzezinski and his book. So all in all, I think all the calculations that they have made to provoke this war or to harm Russia, it backlashed against them. And NATO countries nowadays have shown that the military capabilities and their military capabilities and their military production are pretty limited compared to Russia. And much of the world didn't obey to the US dictates to impose sanctions on Russia. And after the recent Gaza onslaught and the accusations against Israel of committing genocide and taking Israel to the ICJ and the complicity of the United States with Israel, all led that much of the world lost its respect to the United States as the leading power of the world. So we are faced nowadays with the imminent threat of a nuclear exchange, especially with all this talk now that by France and other powers in the region that probably they have to send troops to Ukraine. Of course, there is a disagreement between the different European powers, but if this happens, then it could lead into a much worse situation in the region. So I would say, all in all, the legacy of Victoria Nuland is pretty horrible for the rest of the world. And what she did basically with the provocation of this war with Russia to draw a line in Ukraine so that Russia cannot have any sort of influence over Europe or over Ukraine, they wanted to restore Russia into some sort of a regional power and kill its aspirations to become an international power, for example, right? But they did it on the expense of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. And when Victoria Nuland was asked, this is what she said in this regard.
Without sending a single U.S. soldier into combat and investing less than 1/10 of 1 year's defense budget of the United States, we have helped Ukraine destroy 50% of Russia's ground combat power, 50%, and 20% of its vaunted Black Sea fleet. Ukraine has taken off the battlefield 21 naval ships, 102 Russian aircraft, and 2,700 Russian tanks. By every measure, Ukraine's bravery and strength, its resilience, has made the United States safe.
So the Ukraine war, according to Victoria Nuland, made the United States safer. I don't know what are the calculations and what are the metrics that she's measuring the safety of the United States, because, as I mentioned, the nuclear threat is high, right? And the nuclear exchange between these powers is high. So, of course, this war didn't make the United States any safer. And worse still, she never speaks about the safety of the Ukrainians, right? Or safety of Ukraine, where these people are suffering immensely. And when she speaks about the casualties and the bravery of the Ukrainians, she doesn't show any empathy or sympathy to the Ukrainians. And this is one of the signs of a psychopathic person, for example. And what about the European security, Miss Nuland? Right? So I think her legacy is pretty bad, and she could be characterized, of course, as a person who has done lots of evil acts. So let's see where will she end up after her resignation. Probably she will go back to her family business, to the think tank, the Institute for War Affairs, and continue publishing warmongering articles about my country, Syria, calling for more intervention, and probably also in Ukraine. Because once a neocon, always a neocon. Once a neocon, always a neocon. I like that. I didn't plan on saying that, but then it was really a good, let's say, conclusion of this. By the way, if I sneeze, please apologize, because I'm sitting in front of two lights and I'm also a little bit having a flu today. So, guys, the narrative that they always say, like, yeah, but this Ukraine is a sovereign country and they want to join NATO, right? Or Ukraine is a sovereign country, they want to join the EU, and they chose Europe over Russia, etc., etc. And that's not true. Because when Yanukovych came to power, he came as a person who is neutral toward Russia and toward the Europeans. And he did his calculations with this free trade deal, and so how much his country is gaining in trade with Russia, and how much money his country will gain when they do open their markets to Europe. And he saw that it's more beneficial for him and for his country to open the markets with Russia instead of with Ukraine, because if they with Europe, because if they open the markets and they pursue an open market policy for trade with Europe, then Russia has to close its borders, because then the Russian products will go directly to Europe from Ukraine, right? So this was the point when they wanted to remove him from power. And in my opinion, the narrative has two legs here, that the countries want to join the West and NATO. So these countries have, of course, politicians and have the people. So the fact here is that the people in these countries are socially engineered, and this is a decades-long work. And Victoria Nuland herself confesses this, and I will show you the video now. And the politicians who are presently governing Ukraine are groomed and prepared, and they are trained to become a politician, a pro-Western politician, right? And now I'm going to prove to you with videos. Now it's going to be mostly videos, guys, so brace yourself about these videos. So this is Victoria Nuland now. She was caught secretly deciding Ukraine's next prime minister, telling the US ambassador back then, this is in 2014, in a call, that Arseny Yatsenyuk is the guy. 2 years later, she insisted we never choose candidates in any country. Now I will show you in this video how they pick or how they choose these candidates in different countries. Not like they come and say, you're the guy, but they groom the guy and they prepare the politicians for this position. Take a look.
We, of course, never choose candidates in any country. But what we do in countries that proclaim to be democracies is we offer the opportunity for candidates of all kinds to learn how to put themselves forward to best effect.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably.
We don't do that now, though. We don't mess around other people's elections, Jim.
Only for a very good
Can
cause.
you do that?
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. You know, I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
We, of course, never choose candidates in any country. We offer the opportunity for candidates of all kinds to learn how to put themselves forward to best effect, and we always support the right of peaceful political protest in any country.
So what they say in public is different from what they do behind the closed doors, right? Yesterday we addressed this case of the German generals and officers speaking together in a conference, video conference together, and this audio was leaked to the press. So it's always different, right? And this doesn't only happen in the United States, it also happens in Russia, just for you to know. It's not like the Russians are angels, right? So in Russia, the political system still, they have, of course, their intentions, but they have also tacitly, they do covert operations or other type of hybrid warfare or against their opponents if they feel threatened, etc. But in this case, because we're focusing on Victoria Nuland's case, she intervened in the domestic affairs of Ukraine after the coup in 2014, and they have picked and chose the candidates who is going to govern what and what ministries, and this was caught on tape when she was speaking to the US ambassador to Ukraine, and the tape was leaked to the press. And now, so this is on the political level. So the politicians can be groomed and can be picked. But what about the people? The people can be socially engineered for longer times. It's not like they just pick someone quickly. So they need a decade, 2, 3 of indoctrination, social engineering of the people so that they change their perception about politics and their choices and their candidates and their electoral choices, right? And this has happened in Ukraine. Since the independence of Ukraine, and according to Victoria Nuland, they have spent over $5 billion to socially engineer the people. And this is what she said in this regard. So I'm not bringing anything, right? Let's take a look.
We're talking about Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. diplomat for Europe, Assistant Secretary. This is about a phone call she was having with the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeff Pyatt. And I got to say, for a diplomatic reporter like me, it was a fascinating conversation.
He's now gotten both Sari and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Sari could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, the EU.
Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance, all of which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine.
So, since the independence of Ukraine, the United States spent, this is only the government of the United States, spent $5 billion to teach the Ukrainians about democracy, about self-governance, and about elections, about free press, all these cliches and values that they teach other people and preach, but they, of course, they don't follow them, right, when it comes to them. So, this creates a generation, especially when you link the financial status of the younger generation to these NGOs and to these job opportunities in Ukraine. So when you have a situation, for example, you in social studies, political studies, economic studies, and you graduated from university, you are 22, 24, 26 years old, and the job opportunities that are available in front of you are either from the NED, or from the US aid, or from the Soros organizations, or any other US affiliated or linked organizations, and they are paying you good, because in Ukraine, for example, $1,000, $1,500 is a good money. I remember, for example, when I used to study in Lebanon, I used to study, by the way, in northern Lebanon, at a university called Biolabs University, and it was close to like 10 kilometers away from Tripoli. And Tripoli in the north, there was some Salafi scenes there, some radical scenes there. Anyways, the American embassy, through this NGO called the USAID, they used to hire people in Tripoli because they don't want to go and conduct themselves, all these researchers, and they used to pay them $1,500. $1,500 for Tripoli was a really, really good money in 2010, 2011. And these people just go, for example, in a taxi, and they ask questions to the taxi drivers about politics, about their aspirations, about their general mood, who are they going to vote for, or they ask people in the street. And they create short videos and they send them to the USAID. The USAID takes it and gives it to the American embassy, so they know what's the situation there in the city. They don't need spies, for example. You are the spy. You do the spying work for them, but you get good money. So who's going to be your loyalty when your financial future is linked and dependent on them, right? And many people fall for this, including my former friends. Many of my friends, when they graduated from this university, they worked with the Americans, and they worked with these American embassy linked and affiliated NGOs. Because job opportunities, they're making $2,000, $2,500 when I used to make half that money, right? So the money speaks, as we say in the street language. Now, the US and Europe, they had the opportunity, in my opinion, to follow a different path with Russia, right? They had the opportunity to pursue the inclusion of Russia into the international community, and the inclusion of China into the international community, or to pursue the containment policy and what they call it, the pivoting, for example, to the east, etc., etc. This policy of confrontation, this was the reason why there is a clash nowadays in Ukraine between the east and the west. And this is, they call it the clash of civilizations, they call it the geopolitical conflict, blah, 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 blah. But serious people, geopolitical masterminds, people who understood the importance of Ukraine, and they knew what the US is doing in Ukraine, and not now, 10 years back from now, right, in 2014, they warned the US that this policy will lead into a disaster, because they understand geopolitics. And in 2014, when I was working in Beirut, my boss back then, he's a professor of international relations and history, and he's also an expert in geopolitics. And in 2014, he told me, if World War III is going to erupt, it's going to be in Ukraine. And in 2014, I wasn't smart enough or educated enough or informed enough about Ukraine to understand that, yes, if World War III erupts, then it will be in Ukraine. And this was echoed, the same idea was echoed by John Mearsheimer in 2015. And he warned the West that this policy, guys, is going to be disastrous. This policy is going, the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path, and the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. This is he said this in September 25th, 2015. Take a look. Let's see. Maybe I have to refresh the page. So he's now, the video is lagging now. I don't know, maybe it's because of the Twitter. So basically he says what's going on here is that the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path, right? And then he says, and the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And I believe that the policy that I'm advocating, which is neutralizing Ukraine and then building, this is a problem of Twitter, not my problem. I apologize from you guys. But Twitter, sometimes it lags, and problems like lots of problems actually on Twitter, especially technical problems. And I'm trying to, it's the same. So what we are doing is encouraging the Ukrainians, he says, to play tough with the Russians. And that will ultimately become part of the, and they will ultimately become part of the West, because we will ultimately defeat Putin and we will ultimately get our way. Time is on our side, and of course the Ukrainians are playing along with us, and the Ukrainians are almost completely unwilling to compromise with the Russians and instead want to pursue a hardline policy. Well, as I said to you before, if they do that, the end result is that their country is going to be wrecked. And that we are doing, and what we're doing is in effect encouraging that outcome. I think it would make much more sense for us to neutralize Ukraine, to work to create a neutral Ukraine. It would be in our US interest, and to bury this crisis as quickly as possible. Right. So this was Mearsheimer in 2015 warning of this imminent threat and imminent result of this war. So it's not working anyways, but we understood the message of Mearsheimer in 2015. It was like a prophecy in 2015. And the problem is that this, for the pursuit of isolating and fighting against Russia and against China, the US has no problem in dealing with radical groups, like the neo-Nazi groups, like the terrorist groups. For example, the neo-Nazi groups are something that there is a consensus in Ukraine, a scholarly consensus, historical consensus. Every objective person, or every person who is honest with himself, he knows that Ukraine has a neo-Nazi problem. And guys, every country has a neo-Nazi problem. In every country you have neo-Nazis, but not in every country the neo-Nazis are embraced by the government. And not in every country the neo-Nazis have battalions incorporated inside the Ukrainian armed forces, right? This is unprecedented, and the Ukrainian neo-Nazi scene is very serious for Russia because it has historical context. During World War II, the Banderists and Bandera, they were allies of Hitler, and they fought shoulder to shoulder with Hitler against the Soviet Union. So the Russians know the presence of these elements, and since then, these elements were present there, but they were pumped and they were showered with money, they were given weapons, and they were given political support, because if you want to remove a president like Yanukovych, who's going to do the fighting, right? It's not the people who believe in liberal values, they're not the seculars, not the LGBT people. They're the peoples who would carry arms and fight and die. And those are the ones who are the neo-Nazis, or who were the neo-Nazis. The same thing applies in Syria. In Syria, who are the ones ready to carry arms, fight, and die to kill Assad, right? They are the Islamists, the radical Islamists, the Al-Qaeda, the ISIS, the Jabhat al-Shamiyya, the Ahrar al-Sham, the Islam's army, etc., etc. Those are the ones who would carry arms and fight. So for the Americans, they are pragmatic in this regard. Okay, who's going to fight Assad if we're going to remove him? The Islamists, Al-Qaeda, okay. They give them weapons. This is problematic in my opinion, because even when you have with your competitors or with your enemies, there need to be some how to say, some moral ground that you should stand on, and not to support these neo-Nazis or the Al-Qaeda fighters against uranium. It's just in my opinion. So in this brilliant video reportage prepared by a French TV channel, they summarize everything. Victoria Nuland, she knew about the far-right militias in Ukraine, but she concealed the fact. This is according to French reports. So she was asked later if she knew that there were neo-Nazi and far-right groups in Ukraine who were fighting, who removed Yanukovych from power, and she knew about them. So let's take a look. So the entire Twitter now is lagging. And this is really, to be honest with you, it's really upsetting to me now, because I'm in the middle of a live streaming and these videos are lagging because of a technical problem from, yeah, I think this is working now here. So I will go back to other browser. I will just show you from another browser, and that is from, just a second. Yep. Windows, ignorance, this. Yeah, I think this should work now. Let me see. She's been asked if there were neo-Nazi battalions there, and she refuses first to acknowledge it, and then she says, yes, they were from all sectors of the Ukrainian society. I truly apologize for this technical problem, guys, and it's something that I cannot really fix because it's happening from Twitter itself, and I really try to show you this video that she herself here, she was asked that if there are neo-Nazi groups, and she says, yes, there were neo-Nazi groups among the battalions in Ukraine, and they participated in the removal of Viktor Yanukovych from power. I just need to stop screening this. Yeah. I really tried to, let me see if this is stop screen. Yeah. I really tried to play that video again. It's really important. It was really, really important for you guys to see that video. I will see if this one is working now. Yeah. So this is the case, right? And the confession that the neo-Nazis were present there was not only by the Victoria Nuland, but also by a neo-Nazi battalion inside Ukraine. And this was from a sector. Let me see, what was the name of this battalion? The name of the battalion was the C14. And this video is from the 24th of February 2022. So before 5th February 2022, so before the Russian military intervention or assault against the Ukrainians. And here he says exactly, he says, for example, Maidan was the victory of the nationalist ideas, right? This is the leader of the of this neo-Nazi group. And he says nationalists were the key factor there and clearly at the front lines. Now there is a lot of speculation saying, well, there were only a few neo-Nazis, LGBT and foreign embassies saying there were not much neo-Nazis on Maidan, maybe about 10% of real ideological ones. The thing is that such a thing can say only a moron that never was at war and don't understand that those 10%, maybe even less, 8%, but how much they are much more effective in the proportion of influence, how much their effectiveness was endless, he says. If not for those 8% of neo-Nazis, the effectiveness of Maidan would have dropped by 90%. So it's not about how many of these neo-Nazi personnels were present there personally, but what was the effect, like how impactful were they in this fight to remove Yanukovych from power, right? Who carried the arms and fought against the Yanukovych government, and who had the presence on the ground and the military skills to carry this fight. This is the real, in my opinion, the real issue that it has to be addressed. And in any country, these neo-Nazis, they have not the majority anyways, but this minority is very influential, right? And they have the arms, they have the training, they have the weapons. So they managed to remove Yanukovych from power. And unfortunately speaking, when they removed Yanukovych from power, they didn't stop there. The provocations continued in other sectors as well. Now, the Russians claimed at the beginning of this offensive against Ukraine that there are biolabs in Ukraine, right? And the Americans, they refused to acknowledge that at the beginning. But Victoria Nuland, she admitted later that there are actually biolabs, but she says that those are only for research purposes. I don't know if you believe her, but this is what she said in this regard.
I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
This is, in my opinion, a projection of what they're doing in Ukraine, right? If this is only about research, as I am Valentina asked, it always starts as research. What were they researching, you know? And if it's only about research, then why were they worried that the Russian side would take over these research materials, right? If it's only research, why are they worried that the Russians would take over this research, right? There is something very, very fishy in this regard, unfortunately. Victoria Nuland was in Ukraine only recently, and thankfully this video started working now on X. This was her last visit to Ukraine, right? And this has happened in February the 1st, 2024. And upon her leaving Ukraine, she threatened Russia. And she said, Mr. Putin will receive pleasant surprises on the battlefield and Ukraine will enjoy solid successes this year.
The second and last question. Thank you so much. My question is, military analysts see this year as a year of preparation so that Ukraine will be in defending position. Is it something the U.S. administration share? And we know that Western allies were asking Ukraine to come with a clear vision how they see the battlefield this year. Do you think the tension between political and military leadership influenced that? And what did you hear today in terms of what is the strategy from Ukrainian side regarding its battlefield? Thank you.
I have to say that I leave Kyiv tonight more encouraged about the unity and the resolve about 2024 and its absolute strategic importance for Ukraine. I also leave more confident that even as Ukraine strengthens its defenses, Mr. Putin's going to get some nice surprises on the battlefield, and that Ukraine will make some very strong success this year.
So what are these strong successes that she was speaking of? And what type of weapons that they can supply Ukraine, which the Kiev government can manage to break through the defense lines of the Russians? What are these surprises that she's talking about? And guys, we have to understand something. Her job is a diplomat. She's not a CIA agent. She's not a Pentagon official. She's not in charge of giving weapons to Ukraine. Her job is to actually mediate diplomacy, activate diplomacy between different sides, and not to spill fuel over the fire. Right? She's doing exactly the opposite of her job as a diplomat. But there is a reason for that, because they are making billions of dollars of profits, and many of you were already saying this in the comments. But Victoria Nuland is one of the people who is very honest about these cases, right? And she recently was on CNN after her visit to this last visit to Ukraine. And she actually said that all this bulk of money that they are spending in Ukraine, it actually comes back to the United States. And how does it come back to the United States? Because the military-industrial complex are doing these profits there, right?
It is, and I do hear you and the others in the administration and supporters talking about the vital necessity to do this. But as people say, hope is not a strategy. And do you have any actual belief or reason to believe that eventually this bill will be paid? And if not, how are you going to make sure Ukraine gets vital weapons and ammunition?
Christiane, I have strong confidence that when the House comes back after they've been out in their districts, hearing from the American people, after they have heard from Ukraine, they have heard from Europe, which, by the way, just passed $54 billion in additional aid itself, that we will do what we have always done, which is defend democracy and freedom around the world, not just for victims of tyrants like Putin, but in our own interest in preserving a free and open international order. That's what we need to do. We've done it before. And by the way, we have to remember that the bulk of this money is going right back into the U.S. economy to make those weapons, including good-paying jobs in some 40 states across the United States.
The hurrah, guys, they're making really good money in the United States, and they're creating jobs in the United States on the expense of hundreds of thousands of casualties among the Ukrainians and among the Russians. If this is not the psychopathy and the sociopathy, and I mean, there are so many words in the dictionary that I can use, but for the sake of keeping my self-respect and for also the YouTube's what do they say? The community guidelines, right? I'm not going to use these words, but this woman is a war criminal, you know? And with this type of rhetoric, she has damaged, and with this type of work, she has damaged the relationship between true brotherly countries like Russia and Ukraine. And the bloodbath that happened in Ukraine is unforgivable. And I really hope that more Ukrainians would watch this video and see through this woman's work. And lastly, guys, I want to give you a perspective from this Indian diplomat. He wrote this article only yesterday. And he says, he's the Bahadra Kumar. He says, is ground beneath Biden's Russia policy shifting? So the general impression of Nuland is of an inveterate hawk and Russophobe fired up by neoconservative ideology and American exceptionalism, who participated the Russian intervention in Ukraine, who precipitated the Russian intervention in Ukraine, and is largely responsible for fueling the ongoing war. Of course, there is no denying that Nuland played a key role in the regime change in Kiev 10 years ago. But what lies buried in the debris and all but forgotten today is that Nuland also promoted the Minsk agreements as the way out of the impasse in Donbass, where explosive violence erupted in 2014, as ethnic Russian separatists with support from Russian hinterland rejected the contrived usurpation of power in Kiev by Ukrainian ultranationalist forces. However, once Donald Trump came to power in January 2017, the momentum was lost as the well-known Cold Warrior Kurt Volker was brought in as special envoy for Ukraine to replace Nuland, who quit the government post. At any rate, as the November 2019 presidential election, which Biden won, was approaching, Nuland went on record that it would be necessary to resume the work on the Minsk agreement. Nuland also noted that she didn't know any other way to get Russia to withdraw from Ukraine other than the Minsk document, which, after all, President Putin himself signed. However, as it happened, Biden's Russia policies took an entirely different trajectory. The only plausible explanation would be that, as a strong believer in transatlanticism throughout his career, Biden prioritized the reversal of Trump's benign neglect of the NATO alliance system, which was also crucial for his containment strategy toward China. And it was tactically advantageous to cast Russia in an enemy image to give new ballast to the US transatlantic leadership, which had got weakened under Trump. Suffice to say, Nuland has had a big role in the life of Ukraine, and we can only guess the massive dimensions of it. Indeed, she publicly celebrated the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipeline, which broke the umbilical cord tying Germany to a geographical alliance with Russia. Last month, after a sudden visit to Kiev, Nuland promised some nasty surprises waiting in store for the Kremlin in the Ukraine war. Was it the idea of combat deployment in Ukraine by NATO countries she was referring to? There are no easy answers. The point is, it is entirely conceivable that Nuland's exit could be a reflection of the collapse of the whole architecture of the US's Ukraine strategy, which she designed. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said emphatically stated that the development is to be attributed solely to the failure of the US anti-Russian policy. So there are two scenarios here, one of which is the failure of the US strategy in Ukraine, and the second is the appointment of the successor who is going to probably withdraw from Ukraine, or these new leaked documents were a very, very serious, they received a serious note or warning from Russia that this was the limit. And after that, there is going to be a major escalation and probably nuclear exchange. And the Americans want to back off a little bit or freeze the conflict. So they changed her from this position. So which one do you think is the case, guys? Please let me know in the comments below. I really tried to cover this case intensively from all perspectives. I truly know that more people should know about her and about her policies and what she did for Ukraine and for the Russians as well. If you appreciate this work, guys, please hit the like button before leaving this live streaming and become a patron to support my work. Patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. It's a great help for me, and it keeps my independence, and I can continue working and creating such streams for you. And hopefully more people will also join this stream and watch it later. So I've been your host, guys, Kevork Almassian of Syriana Analysis, and I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time. Salam.